So good morning, everyone in Australia. My name is Michelle Maloney, and I'm the National Convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. And I'm really delighted this morning to be hosting a number of speakers and friends from around the world to give us an update about their work in the world of rights of nature. But before I introduce our speakers, I would like to acknowledge country. Here in Australia, it's become a very important tradition wherever possible to acknowledge whose country you live, work, and play on. I'm fortunate to live in the beautiful lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples of what is now known as North Brisbane. And I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, and the emerging elders and leaders who are caring for country and continuing traditions that are ancient. We also like to acknowledge the remarkable civilizational culture and governance system that has cared for country and cared for this continent since time immemorial. And as part of the work that AILA and the New Economy and Future Dreaming, our sister organisations, is involved in, we also like to acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonisation in Australia. Australia is one of the youngest colonised places in the world in terms of the British Empire invading in 1788, and there's just so much culture and continuity of civilizational knowledge here in the first peoples of this continent. And I'm really privileged to work with a number of remarkable people here in Australia. And if anyone wants to find out more about their work, I'm going to give a few plugs to some websites like Future Dreaming, the work of Mary Graham, the work of Anne Polina, and many other great people. But on to today. So today we're calling it the Rights of Nature Symposium, an update from around the world. We've got some wonderful speakers, and we're going to have an update from a lot of different jurisdictions because people are working in lots of different places. So I might actually leave the more detailed introductions of who people are and what they're doing. I'll just introduce speaker by speaker. But before we do that, I have a really sad apology from our own Aussie Rights of Nature person, Erin O'Donnell. She has broken her ankle about 2 days ago. Erin can't join us. So what I thought I'd do is I might actually let our friends from North America do their talks first. And in case time zones start to beat them, I'm going to give an update about Australian rights of nature, first laws, legal personhood, and other things at the end of our session today. And we will have a break in about an hour. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker today, someone I really admire and someone I consider to be a pioneer of the Rights of Nature movement, Mari Margul. Mari, how are you today? And thank you for joining us on your yesterday.
I wish it was yesterday. Michelle, thank you so much. It's so nice to join everybody. And as Osprey said, I haven't seen a lot of folks in a long time, so it's really nice just to see faces. I really appreciate, Michelle, you hosting this Earth Laws Month. We've been really pleased at the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. My colleague, Thomas Lindsay, and I have been really pleased to participate and to join again at the end of the month to help sort of bookend, I think, the incredible work that Michelle and her team have been doing in Australia and our partnership with her. And I know she'll talk about that at the end of this session, so I won't speak to that, but I just want to say I really think this has been an important month of education and learning that Michelle has brought forward with her team, and I just want to congratulate you on that. And again, just happy to be a part of it. Michelle really asked me to focus on our work with First Nations, which I will absolutely do, very happy to. We do a lot of partnership at the center with what we would call tribal nations within the United States. We do work around the world at local, state, provincial, and national levels to advance democratic rights, environmental rights, rights of nature. But I will focus a bit on our work, particularly with tribal nations and First Nations that are also moving rights of nature laws forward within their own Indigenous governance jurisdictions. We've had a number of important milestones just this year with that in this work. Several that I'll mention. We have had, there's a number of different tribal nation or First Nation coalitions within the United States. In March, the Midwest Alliance of Sovereign Tribes, which is over 30 different sovereign tribal nations, we helped them to come together to adopt a rights of nature policy. So all of them agreeing and supporting that the rights of nature is important, and importantly, important to move into Indigenous governance, into their own tribal nation governance. And similarly, in June, we work with our partners, Minneconnican, out of the Menominee tribe in Wisconsin, to develop a policy for the National Congress of American Indians, which adopted the Rights of Nature policy that we helped them to develop in June. And so we're talking about hundreds of sovereign tribal nations now within the United States, just over the past 6 months, that have voted for and supported advancing the rights of nature in general, but in particular within tribal sovereign Indigenous governance, which I think is really important to put their voice to it, put their support for it. And of course, we're seeing tribal nations doing that within the United States, advancing the rights of nature right into their own governing frameworks. And that is really quite important. I think probably most people on this call, or everybody on this call, I think has an appreciation for the need for Indigenous self-determination. And from our perspective, absolutely central to that sovereignty or self-determination, the ability, the authority to self-govern for any peoples, but in particular Indigenous peoples, is not only that ability to self-govern, but what that means to us must include the ability to protect the lands upon which they depend, both lands perhaps that they have been removed to, but as well as their ancestral and traditional lands. Within the United States, a number of tribal nations signed, or were forced to sign, I should say, treaties with the United States government back in the 1700s, 1800s, in which they would have rights to hunt, fish, gather, on their traditional lands that they have been forced off of. But they don't have the ability, the authority to protect those lands that they were forced off of, but they still have access to under those guarantees, under those legal treaties. And so one of the things that we have focused a lot on and continue to is that the ability to have self-determination means not only being able to protect the lands that you were forced upon, and we call those reservations within the United States, but also the ability to protect those lands off those reservations on their traditional ancestral lands, and protecting the rights of nature, both on their current lands, their reservation lands, but also the lands off those reservations. So we've done a lot of work within that to advance law and policy with rights of nature on that, and also assisting the White Earth Nation, which is part of the larger Chippewa tribe, to bring the first case into a tribal court to enforce the rights of nature, both on and off their reservation, specifically the right to wild rice, or what they would call manomen, which is a critically important food for their sustenance today and going back generations. And so that's the first case, the first time that that's ever even been considered by a court. And that was brought last year, and we have helped with that litigation and continue to move that forward. A second case that I wanted to mention, a separate tribal nation, is a Saxoadal Tribe, which is in Washington State, where I live. And they have brought a case also into tribal court around the rights of salmon. Again, a critically important food for them, but also that they consider a relative, the salmon, the fish. And salmon within the rivers that they concerned with, particularly the Skagit River, those are extremely at-risk species, and dams are in those rivers. And so they brought a case against the city that owns those dams that's blocking this passage. So these are the first Indigenous nations within the United States to seek to enforce the rights of nature. And those have both happened within the last 12, 13 months. We've been really pleased to be able to partner and help to advance those. And I think they're really important milestones to see this beginning to move forward. We think that tribal nations and First Nations really all over the world are going to more and more become the face of leadership for advancing the rights of nature and of ecosystems of particular species, animal and plant, but nature in general. And so our role in that, we're really just pleased to be able to help move that forward in partnership with tribes and continue to do so. And so I would be happy to share any of those policies that I mentioned or laws that I mentioned or litigation cases that I've mentioned. Michelle, if that's of any interest, I'm happy to follow up with anyone on that as well.
Thanks, Mari. That was extremely succinct. But now what I forgot to say, folks, is because all of our speakers are coming in from different time zones, we're going to have questions for each speaker after each speaker. Because this session may go for 2 hours, we don't want to leave questions to the end. You might not remember what you wanted to ask. So if anyone has questions for Mari, please pop them in the chat. And in the meantime, I have one question that's come through privately, and I have a couple myself. So if other speakers have questions for each other, I know it's been a while since many of us have caught up together, then please just unmute and let us know. So Mari, thank you for that update. Given that you've been very succinct in your time, and we do have a few more minutes for your talk, let alone questions, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you and I and Thomas had a webinar a few weeks ago about reflecting on the origins of Rights of Nature and where it's coming from and where it's going to. And I see that Natalia Green is able to join us from Ecuador, which is wonderful. So we'll be able to see where things are up to in Ecuador. But as we sit back and reflect on the work that that you and Thomas and others have been doing for more than a decade, how do you see Rights of Nature now that you look back at it, its sort of evolution? Has there been surprises for you? Has it emerged the way you thought it would?
No. Short answer, succinct answer is no, it has not. And the reason I say that is because from the very earliest days when we were doing the first Rights of Nature laws, Michelle, as you know, those were in the United States with local communities. That was the first law in 2006. And so now we're 15 years or so later. What has been unexpected, but pleasing, of course, is how quickly this concept has been picked up, not only within local communities in the United States, of which more than 36 now have established the rights of nature in law, but of course, and Nadia is here, and we worked her on the Ecuador constitutional process in 2008. And now you have other countries that have established the rights of nature into national law, at local laws, at state level laws. And there have been court cases that have declared that certain ecosystems, rivers and others, possess legal rights. We never imagined that it would happen, unfold that way. And I think it's actually one of the, it's delightful, number one, but number two, it also, I think, is incumbent upon all of us here as activists to understand that nothing ever moves in a straight line. And so part of our job is to anticipate and prepare for opportunities when they present themselves, be ready to jump through that window of opportunity as we talk about, in the political science world, because you never know when it's going to happen. And also recognize that even when you have maybe like one step forward and 5 steps back, you never know when that next leap is going to come. And so being prepared for that, hopefully anticipating it and being ready when it happens. And the other piece I'll say, Michelle, to this question, which is awful, Margaret is here, and I know she's in Florida, and there's a terrible storm happening in Florida right now, just so powerful and made all the more so because of climate change, human-caused climate change. And so I think the other side of the coin, if you will, is the rights of nature, I think, and in particular with Ecuador's constitution, just opened up so many, people's hearts and minds to what was possible. And unfortunately, on the other side of that coin is the continued deterioration of the environment, in particular climate change and extreme storms and so on, has also opened up, I think, people's hearts and minds to what is necessary. And those two things together, I think, have helped to drive and build and advance this movement in a way I would never have anticipated 15 years ago. But here we are. And I think that, a great tribute to everybody on this call, including particularly your presenters who have done such amazing work in different parts of the world, because people have really taken the reins on this and just leaped forward into something that's absolutely innovative and new. And a decade ago was considered laughable, but today is established law and policy, not only in constitutions, but in laws in different places all over the world.
Yeah, that's right, Mari. And for those who don't believe us, I remember giving a talk in Australia in 2012 when we created AILA about this interesting development in Ecuador and Bolivia. At that time, that's all we had about rights of nature. And I was scoffed at and chortled at, and treated rather poorly by other environmental lawyers, let alone other folks. So it's very interesting to see how it's emerged. Osprey, I think you have a comment or a question for Mari.
Yeah, really quick. I'll leave my main comments since I'm talking in a little bit, but I just wanted to thank you for your work, Mari. It's really great to hear all of your updates. And, speaking of the climate crisis, which you were just mentioning, and, people needing to understand that we need a new paradigm of Earth jurisprudence, because obviously the legal systems regarding our law are not working, or we wouldn't be here. I wanted to just, highlight, this Indigenous-led movement for rights of nature and how important that is, because, we're actually returning to values that really rights of nature are birthed out from, and how powerful that is that we are now, finding ways to have a legal framework that really expresses very ancient understandings of our relationship to nature. And so I think that full circle of communication with First Nations who have a good relationship with the natural world is so important. And you were mentioning the wild rice and in Minnesota. And I just wanted to also link that great work to also being part of climate, fighting the climate crisis, because as you know, that wild rice was also used as, continues to be a way to fight the Line 3, Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline. And I thought that was really interesting. If you wanted to comment and all about that, how, here we have an example of standing up for rights of nature in the rice in this case, also as a way to fight off this really terrible pipeline. And I think it's really interesting to see that linkage. And I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a direct connection, which is the wild rice, which depends on freshwater habitat, is, it's starting to migrate north, as other species are too, or I should say to colder climate, colder water, because of climate change. There's a Minnesota, where the White Earth Nation is based, is in an extreme drought situation, again, related to climate. And as Osprey mentioned, the Line 3 Enbridge pipeline, which would take tar sands oil through and very close to the reservation, and is disrupting wild rice habitat, both on and off reservation. And of course, that tar sands oil is a great climate change polluter. So all of these things are tied. You can't separate any of them out of it. And the wild rice is the plaintiff, the lead plaintiff in the case that the White Earth brought, because their rights are being violated because this is happening. And so it's all interconnected. You're absolutely right. And I think I want to emphasize what you said, which is that for many people, this continues to be a very new idea, the rights of nature, recognizing that the natural world even has a basic right to exist. But it's a very ancient idea. And so I think it's always important for us to understand that, to kind of internalize that nature being a relative, as so many tribal members talk to us about, is something that can be really quite a foreign concept for many in the Western world. But I do think it's becoming less foreign, I guess is a way to say it. And I think that's really important, because I think it demonstrates a shift, particularly within Western culture, about how we see our relationship to nature, and can we consider nature a relation to us. I think that's really actually quite critical, and I think an important piece of what the rights of nature has actually kind of brought forward, Michelle, going back to your first question, which is how has the rights of nature kind of evolved? And I think that's one of those key pieces. So Osprey, thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's actually really important.
Yeah, thank you, Osprey. Mari, I've got one more question for you. It's sort of come in privately. Someone was asking about the difference between, and I apologize, folks, I should have given a short intro to some of the different ways you can look at rights of nature from across a nation or a whole jurisdiction, or the emergence of recognizing one ecosystem such as a river. And in longer talks we've all given about rights of nature, some of those details are definitely available, and I'll pop some links into some previous webinars that many of us have given that you might want to get more detail. However, someone has a burning question about the Manoomin rice and the salmon. The question is, I've heard about rights across a country in Ecuador. I've heard about rights for rivers, but what does it mean to give rights to one species when there's other species in the river? Can you just talk a little bit about your experiences, Mari, and kind of how it's shifted from jurisdiction-wide or country to system to species, and maybe talk a little bit about how that's panned out in what it means for a court case, or as Osprey mentioned, how it's connected to stopping pipelines. So,
right, yeah, that's a really good question, and that's one of those evolutions that we've seen in the movement, which, you know, all of nature being recognized as possessing legal rights, like as happened in communities within the United States with those first laws, as happened within Ecuador's constitution, where nature or Pachamama is recognized on the whole as possessing, in that case, constitutional rights. And of course, we've now seen rights of rivers, rights of, in the case of Monoman, a plant species, the first law to recognize rights of a particular plant species. So, you know, there's a, you know, the concern being, well, if we recognize rights of one species or one ecosystem, aren't we leaving all the rest out? I mean, the short answer is yes, we are, but it's not forever. The intention is making the change where you can, when you can, how you can. So if the change is to first be able to recognize the rights of a particular river or the rights of wild rice, take that, seize that change. If you can make it within policy or law, would be my recommendation, because you know that that's a big first step to having the rest of nature having its rights recognized. And so that's one piece, that it's not intended as an endpoint, but as a big starting point, making recognition of legal rights, starting, you know, to norm it, if you will, for a particular species or ecosystem, whatever it might be, knowing that you want to embrace all of nature, so that all of nature is protected within this sphere of legal rights. But beyond that, I will also say, is that I think we also, you know, you can take a look at some of these laws or court decisions, which is, you know, particularly with like the wild rice or with a river, we're not like with a river, it's not literally just the water within the river basin. It's an ecosystem approach. And with the wild rice, it's the ecosystem. So the rights, recognizing particular rights of wild rice sounds very, I guess, finite, but really it's the rice has its own rights to exist, but that part of that includes the right to freshwater habitat. So that's a very broad ecosystem approach. So there's a lot of protection of the ecosystem and species within it, and depend upon it within that concept of protecting the rights of wild rice. That's just one example. So I think it's not as, it might sound limited, but it's actually generally a very broad area of legal rights that is accomplished by passing a specific species or ecosystem law. But overall, of course, the intention is to advance legal rights of all of nature at all levels of government and internationally, ultimately. So I see it very much as a big starting point when we're able to do that. I'm going to encourage people to seize it if you're able to, knowing that we're on a journey here. And again, the path is not straight. So you never know when that next step can be taken to recognize rights of another species or ecosystem or all of nature.
Thank you, Mari. That's excellent. And just a reminder to folks, each of our speakers will be talking for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to have 10 minutes of questions for those speakers straight afterwards. We will try to get to all the questions, but where we don't, we'll kind of weave them in as we go along. It's just that everyone's in different time zones and some of them may have to duck off after their talk. So Mari, thanks so much for joining us for a relatively short talk. But in a moment, I'll be putting everybody who speaks today, I'll be popping your websites and your information in. So Mari Margle, someone asked, did I miss Mari introducing herself? Mari's modesty may have meant she has not introduced herself fully, or you missed it, but Mari is from the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, based in the US, but working with many colleagues around the world. Mari Margle, thank you so much for joining us. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everybody.
Take care over there. All right, our next speaker is Grant Wilson, who I did see was on. And today is going to be a movable feast. No, he is there. Are you there, Grant? Come in.
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. I can spotlight you if you turn your video on. That could
It's
be
on, yep.
If you would like to be spotlighted. Oh, actually, sorry, I've got it wrong. I had Natty Green next, and I am trying to be considerate to time zones. Everyone say hi to Grant Wilson from the Earth Laws Centre. Yay! Hi, Grant. Do you mind if I turn you off and bring you back?
I'd love to listen to Natalia Green as well. On to her.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, guys. It's been a weird morning. My power went out just before we had to start, and I'm a little bit all over the shop. I would now like to introduce the absolutely fabulous Natalia Green from the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, in normally based in Ecuador, but I can't assume where she is today. And Natty, I'm just going to spotlight you so we can all see you. Good evening for you. How are you?
Thank you, Michelle. It's been a while. I'm actually here in Quito, in Ecuador. It's nighttime here, so I'm trying the best lighting here. So thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to see you and many of the amazing speakers and people who make this really beautiful movement.
Yeah, thank you, Natty. Yeah, some of us don't catch up enough because we're all burrowed into our own places, which is the way it should be. But Natty, we'd love to hear from you. Some of the people recognize Ecuador as the heartland of the Rights of Nature movement. So if you could give us a bit of an update, maybe introduce yourself. I think I keep forgetting to introduce everyone, but introduce yourself however you wish. And yeah, thank you so much, Natty.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you, Mary, for preceding my talk. I'm Natalia Green. I'm from Ecuador. I'm based in Quito. I've been lucky enough to participate with the Rights of Nature movement for the past 14 years. I was very lucky to be part of the Constitutional Assembly process back in 2008, when Ecuador became the first country to recognize the rights of nature. And I've pretty much devoted my life to the rights of nature since then. So I've been working the past 14 years on the rights of nature, and it's a topic that I'm really passionate about. And of course, I want to tell you a little bit about the story. In 2008, we were able to recognize that nature is a subject of rights in our Ecuadorian constitution. And then we had the pleasure of meeting, like many people who are actually here in the room, in the conference for the people and the climate change and the rights of Mother Earth in Bolivia, in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And right there in 2010, we realized that we were not the only people kind of crazy in Ecuador, that not only was Bolivia, but there were people around the world, Australia, the US, Europe, and so many other places in the world that were really promoting the rights of nature. And that is when in 2010, September 2010, we created the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. That is a space that I really want to introduce here, because I feel, and I really encourage people to join. It's an alliance, it's not an organization, it's an alliance where most people who are here today are part of, and we are a hub of information really promoting the growth of this movement that has, as Mary was saying, has grown so much. What I love about the Rights of Nature movement is that I feel we're doing some sort of like acupuncture to the world. Why an acupuncture? Because now 37 countries around the world have rights of nature legislation, either at the national level, like Michelle was saying, what we have here in Ecuador. And we were really rooting for Chile to become the second country in the world. Unfortunately, that referendum didn't pass. So we are still the only country in the world that has recognized nature as a subject of rights in our constitution. However, there are countries like Bolivia, for example, that has it as a national law. We have Panama, for example, that just passed a law at a national level recognizing the rights of nature. And we have very different levels. We have the case of Mexico that recognizes the rights of cities, the case of the US that Mary was mentioning, and even Brazil and some others that recognize the rights of in different ordinances. And we have, as we've said, these rights of ecosystems, what happened in New Zealand, what happened in India, in Bangladesh, in Colombia with Rio Atrato, and what's happening in many other places with the recognition of the rights of rivers. We actually just had some great news from Mar Menor in Spain, and this is happening all over the world. So what I really want to encourage people, and what I'm really happy to share with you all, is that indeed, this pretty much started in 1972 with this writing of Christopher Stone of Should Trees Have Standings, but the movement has grown so much that that is growing so much that I feel that we've been pushing the ball for a long time, and now it's starting to roll by itself because it's happening everywhere. So pretty much what we do with Garn is, as I like to quote Cormac Cullinan in this, we are gardeners of this like amazing plant that is growing and growing, and the only thing that we can do is sort of like trim it. We don't own it. The Rights of Nature movement has its own life, but we like to see it grow and flourish, and we like to put some water and help it grow. How? By educating people, by telling people that this is possible, that the Rights of Nature movement is growing, and that this is definitely a paradigm shifter. This is an idea whose time has come. We actually talked about this idea back in 2010 when we created the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and I think that we were wrong because its time hadn't come yet. And I feel that now it has. We are actually launching an AG monitor, an Earth Jurisprudence monitor next month with one of our hubs. We have many different thematic and regional hubs with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And we are launching this hub so you can all see, the public can see all of these initiatives that are happening around the world, and that everybody can have available all the verdicts and the things that are happening all over the world. But I would like to go back to Ecuador and say that indeed this wasn't something easy. When we were discussing this in the Constitution, we actually didn't think that it was going to pass. We thought that this was an idea, very interesting idea for people to start thinking about, that we were not separated from nature, and that nature was a property, but that we were part of nature, and that whatever happened to nature happened to us. And we wanted that debate to start. Different from many other social movements where, I don't know, the women's movement were able to pass a women's legislation for women to vote, for example. This wasn't the result of a big movement in Ecuador. It was actually a result of many things happening from all over the world that ended up, bringing about the idea of the rights of nature in Ecuador, a country that has a very strong indigenous presence, a presence that acknowledges and recognizes that nature is our mother, and that nature needs to be protected. And it was so clear that when we were talking with some indigenous leaders during the constitutional period, and we said, we are promoting this in the Constitution, one of them told me, like, don't you guys have that yet? It was so obvious that, of course, rights of nature needed to be recognized, that it was evident that a Constitution should have that. But it doesn't, and it doesn't in most of the countries, because nature is still considered an object, a property that you exploit, and not a subject that you respect and that you protect. So indeed, of course, we wanted this change to happen all very fast, and we wanted Ecuador to change paths. And unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. We still have a lot of difficulties with protection of nature, especially because we are a country that is dependent on oil, for example. And now that we're running out of oil, it's the government's, I'm saying in plural because many of them are turning into mining and are shifting the attention into mining. And what we have had is that we've had to fight against this big extractivist project with the rights of nature that have become a really powerful tool in Ecuador to protect nature. So indeed, in Ecuador, and I can, after I'm done, I'll write down if you guys want to follow it in Spanish, we have a legal observatory for the rights of nature in Ecuador, and we have 56 cases of the rights of nature in Ecuador. Most of them are in favor of nature, and we've had amazing accomplishments. I would like to point out some of them. One of them is a verdict from Los Cedros. Los Cedros is a national protected forest that in December 1st, 2021, the Constitutional Court recognized the rights of nature of Los Cedros and prohibited mining, that unfortunately was a legal activity in a protected forest. It protected mining, it protected the forest against mining because we were able to demonstrate with more than 40 amicus curiae demonstrating what was happening there with the orchids and the monkeys and the frogs and all the biodiversity, that was a really special place. So if you guys want to read a really amazing verdict, I really recommend Los Cedros. And we're keeping with these verdicts. Fortunately, after 14 years of rights of nature in the Constitution, this has become a really powerful tool to promote a different change in paradigm. For example, we have in River Piatua, there was a river that had the legal permits under the environmental law umbrella to have and build a dam. However, it was going to take a species into extinction, and we were able to stop that project with the Quichuas that promoted a legal case. So then you can see that with the rights of nature, we can definitely move beyond environmental law because we have that. We're actually right now in a very interesting case with two frogs, the long-nosed harlequin and the confused rocket frog. These two frogs were rediscovered in Intac, that is a zone that is threatened by mining. by a copper mine managed by a company from Chile, Codelco. And we have put these 2 frogs as an umbrella species to protect many of the different species that live in intact. And we're trying to fight this company with the rights of nature. If you guys follow Leonardo DiCaprio's Twitter, you can see a lot of them because he's been helping us promote the idea. And we have a lot of this sort of support really pushing into like a real protection of the rights of nature. We have many different cases, for example, to try to stop gas flaring in the Amazon with all the oil. And this has been a really amazing and powerful tool, especially to combine the rights of nature with collective rights. Most of the times when there is a case on the violation of rights of nature, there's a case on the violation of human rights, like the lack of previous consultation. So we're working on all of that. And that has really led, I think, Ecuador to be a pioneer country to really apply the rights of nature. As I like to say, in the conversation, I remember an Argentinian person telling me, "You guys at least have a different way of speaking. With a company, we can only say, please, do not harm nature so much, like limit your actions. In Ecuador, you can actually prohibit some activities if they threaten nature. So we have a completely different paradigm in which we can work in Ecuador. And that's really, really amazing. And what we want to do, and we want to keep doing, is we want to keep inspiring more people, because as I was saying in the beginning, now we have 37 countries around the world that are promoting the rights of nature, that have been inspired with Ecuador, that although we have not been able to guarantee all nature rights, we make the comparison with human rights. Human rights, unfortunately, have not been guaranteed after 60 years of this declaration, but it was very important to move forward with the recognition of human rights. And then that is what needs to happen now. We need to move forward with the recognition of the rights of nature, because we need an urgent change. We know that we're running out of time as humanity to make a change. And we definitely believe that the rights of nature is this paradigm shifter that is going to allow to restitute the relationship that we have with nature. Because if we think about it, nature not as an object, but as a person, that our rights are limited to nature rights and so on, then we can think about the projects and think about development in a much different way. So I think I'm running out of my 10 minutes, Michelle. I'd love to answer any questions, but I'm more than happy to share this experience with you. I'm really, really proud to be Ecuadorian and to be in this amazing country that is really moving things forward.
Thank you so much, Natty. That was an excellent catch-up. Can I just ask, how many countries, I thought I heard you say, and sorry if I'm wrong, I thought I heard you say that Ecuador has had 56 cases. 56 cases. I had no idea it was so many. And the new academic hub inside GAN, that's going to have access for folks like even I, back in the day, I used to know most of what was going on in the world, and now I can't keep up. So will that hub and that space be a place for those of us to find out more about all of those cases, or is there somewhere else we can go to read about them?
Sure, Michelle. So I've just written down here the website for the Ecuadorian Observatory for the Rights of Nature. You'll find the 56 cases there. It's, of course, in Spanish. Right. And the database of the AAG monitor is already available. We'll have a big launch in October, and we'll include it in the GARN website that I'll put it here. And that's going to be a tool that is going to be available to everybody to look up and to understand and to see, and to actually download all the verdicts and all the cases, the legal cases that have been able to recognize legally that nature is a subject of rights in these many different ways that we've been speaking about. So that is definitely going to be an open tool, and it's going to be open source, so we can keep updating. Because I agree with you, Michelle, at our GARN website, you can see that we have a timeline, but it's very hard to keep up with that, because fortunately this movement is growing so much and and it's so big and in all corners of the world that we are doing this open source map so people can contribute and we can keep it updated.
Thanks, Natty. And look, I might ask you a similar question to that question I asked Mari, which is looking back over the time that you guys have been working on rights of nature, you personally, and then the emergence of GAN and the work you do in Ecuador. How do you feel the movement has moved and changed? What have you been surprised by, and what have you been seeing when you look back? It's easy to look retrospectively at trends, but when they're happening, you can't see them. So I
will say, Michelle, that I'm actually not surprised, because I was surprised that even Ecuador took so long to start understanding what we had done. You know, in 2009, we actually passed a legislation to accept open pit mines in Ecuador, like 1 year after we had promoted it in our constitution. So it's only now I feel that it's catching on. And I was hoping that will come faster. But what I feel that is happening around the world is that we have such an urgent need. I can see, and I'm telling you, I was fortunate to be part of the dialogue in Chile. And the conversation that happened in Chile in 2022, it was so different than what we had in 2008, when we didn't have climate change right here, when we didn't have this pressure and this understanding of the urgency. So there was such a different conversation that I'm actually not surprised that this movement is growing so much, because I definitely see it as a solution, and I see it as an outcome of all this desperation that we have, that we are definitely running out of time. So I actually hope that it's going to grow much faster.
Yes, yes. And Natty, if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit about what happened in Chile, what the hopefulness was, and then why things didn't go quite the way people wanted them to?
Sure, Michelle. We really followed up this Chile very closely. And Chile had a beautiful, like the writing on the rights of nature, the recognition of the rights to nature, the right to water. Remember that Chile is still, unfortunately, with the Pinochet constitution, a country that privatizes water. So it's a very terrible situation. And the writing with plurinationality, with the rights of nature, for gender, it was a really amazing project that happened. But
and this was was it a new constitution or a constitutional amendment?
So it was a new constitution. It was not a constitutional assembly. It was a constitutional convention. But this was the result of the uprising that happened in October 2019, that people really wanted a change. So this was the result of, after like a very long participative process of like electing the assembly, the constitutional members, the convention members, and having proposals from civil society. What happened, and I can show you a graph if you want, and guys want, in the past 10 years, this has been the first time that Chileans voted, had a mandatory vote. That last time was 10 years ago. So no one knew what they were expecting. And if you see the results now, this was an amazing constitutional draft. There was so much work put into it, but the same amount of people who voted in favor of Boric and who voted in favor of the assembly voted in favor of this constitutional draft. And the same amount of people who voted against them voted this same time, but the difference of the people who voted against it and made the rejection win were all the people who were not voting, who never voted, who were forced to vote for this time after 10 years, and who they weren't able to preview how they could vote. As you can understand, Chile is still very conservationist. All the media is pretty much managed by a very small group of elite. And they started doing like a very bad publicity to the constitution since the very beginning. So I think that many things happened, but especially this idea of, like a board, they didn't know what were they expecting, especially because they didn't know who was voting, and this thing of the mandatory vote. So we are hoping, President Boric has said that they're going to try to have a new draft that is maybe more democratic, because the Conservative Party didn't have a lot of room in this draft. They're expecting to do a new draft. Unfortunately, the rights of nature is an idea that had a lot of support. So we are hoping that whatever happens, maybe it's going to take time, but then they will have rights of nature in their new constitution.
Right. Thank you, Natty. That's excellent. And Shannon has a comment to share. One of our speakers, Shannon Biggs. Are you there, Shannon?
Here, thank you. Natty, this is really more of a question to you. In speaking with some friends of mine from Chile, and was asking them their thoughts on the Constitution, and there was, it wasn't, rights of nature wasn't the stumbling block necessarily, but that it was sort of a lot of people felt, or the media portrayed it as too much, too fast, and very kitchen sink. So there were so many things that people could object to. And I wanted to get, since you've been there and been working closely with folks, what your thoughts were on that.
Definitely, I think that they wanted a big change and Chile wasn't prepared for that. And there were a lot of things regarding gender and plurinationality and environment. I think that environment caused the least like rejection, but I think if they had to vote for like parts of it, it would have been different, but they had to vote for this huge, big change all of a sudden. And I definitely agree that that was like a big part of it. Yes, the big change, like, people are still like, you can see the struggle of what happened in 2019. People do want to change, but it was too fast, I feel, and it was too much. So we are hoping that a new draft will be maybe, I wouldn't say more democratic, but because this process was extremely democratic, but maybe it will include, like more of the consensus of like the left wing of the right wing, because Chile is a very polarized country. So that is what I can say. I don't know, Michelle, do you want me to answer some of the questions?
Don't worry about the questions, darling. You relax. I'm looking after the questions because I'm trying to feed generic questions into discussions when we have time. But I know a lot of folks, our speakers, will have to pop off after they talk. So I want to focus on questions for you. However, there is one in there that Peter has asked. And it's, are there any RON and other legal instruments that can aid in stopping oil and gas drilling permanently? Now, Peter's put it in the context of some groups I'm not aware of in the Yasuni Mega. Now, I think maybe also, can I add to that question? What I was going to ask you to talk about, Natty, is what do you feel the big picture impacts have been of more than 10 years of rights of nature in Ecuador? Has it stopped the big stuff, or is that kind of next on the agenda of the litigation to get some successes stopping the big stuff? Thank you for your question, Peter.
So let me start by your question, Michelle. We've had one of these 56 cases was a case against, like a community member who killed a jaguar. And of course, we hate that. We don't want any jaguars to be killed, but we have not been able to stop, like the oil explosion in the Amazon that is going to go, kill many more jaguars than that one jaguar. So we can see those like contradictions, of course, where, like even a community member is punished, but not the government by, like continuing with this big extraction. We are trying to stop. The Guaranis have a rights of nature favorable case. After we actually had an uprising now in last June, and one of the results of that uprising was a dialogue with the government, and there's a moratorium in some oil blocks that is not a result only on rights of nature, but more of like the indigenous mobilization. And regarding oil, something that we were able to stop with a rights of nature case was the gas flaring, because in addition to oil, and of course you can understand that oil has like the problem with oil spills and with like the disasters and the pollution and the deforestation and many things related to oil, the gas flares are burning there every day and are causing all this harm to the people and to nature. And we were able to win a case led by 9 young women. All of them had either themselves or a family member, they had cancer because they were so close to the gas flares. And we won that case. It was resolved that there was a violation of the rights of nature and that those gas flares needed to be stopped. However, they gave like a very long timeline, like 10 or 12 years to stop them. That is too much. So that is what we're trying. We have had a lot of advances, but in the implementation of those laws, that's where we have to keep on fighting. And yes, I just want to mention, Michelle, one question that was before, about like nature being property and how do we enforce it. I just want to mention that very easily, that we had that discussion when we were writing the Constitution, and I remember saying, like, are we able to sue a volcano, for example, because a volcano is going to have an eruption and we're going to be killed because we live right next to it? First of all, why do you live right next to a volcano? Well, we all here in Ecuador, we live around many volcanoes. But then the second thing is that we need to acknowledge that nature is compiling with its responsibilities every day. She's giving us air and water and and soil absolutely every day, and it's us that are like going against the limits of nature. So I think that nature is not winning, and we are not winning either, because we are both losing in this like war against nature. So we just need to reestablish our relationship with nature and understand, what are we doing wrong, and understand what are our limits. The Rights of Nature movement is not saying this, you need to leave nature untouched, intangible. It's not saying that. It's not a conservationist movement. It's saying we need to change our relationship with nature and understand that our rights have to have limits as well, as everybody, in how we relate to nature. So I just want to put that out, because many people think we're saying like leave nature untouched, and that's not what we're saying. We're saying let's change our relationship with nature.
Yeah, thanks, Natty. And just before we let you go, so just so those who didn't see the chat, Natty was responding to a question from Glenn, who said, since English type law in colonial countries around the world is solely based on protecting property, is it a basis for legal rights of nature to protect humanity from nature? So what I wanted to just remind folks, and if you're new to the rights of nature space, in a very simplistic way, the rights of nature movement is all about saying Western law particularly, but a lot of modern law, treats all of the living world as if it's just human property. It doesn't matter if it's a national park or a river or a dog, everything out there is just property. Nothing in the legal system has its own subjective rights to exist or thrive. Rights of nature is trying to challenge that paradigm. So from a lot of folks will often ask, well, hang on, don't Indigenous cultures have their own legal systems? Absolutely, yes. And really, rights of nature is spearheading a pushback against Western constructs of law that just see the living world as furniture and food and not this living, breathing, remarkable primary source of life. So be aware that the rights of nature movement is not the source of solutions for everything, but it plays an incredibly important way of opening up people's minds to go, hang on, did you just say that my legal system sees all of nature as property? Yes, it does. And in the conversations we have in Australia, people go, but what about national parks? I said, no, everything belongs to human beings in our law. We might protect that bit and trash that bit, but it's all up to us. Whereas what Rights of Nature is trying to do is say, actually, we respect all of the earth community as living beings and being a subject worthy of existing. The nuances and details then depend on culture to culture. So thank you for letting me interrupt and share that little piece. Now, we've actually got a great question, which I might come back to. I'll put it to you, Natty, but I'd like to also put it to Grant, Osprey, Shannon, and Margaret later to talk about. The questions from Walter, and he says, comparing Spanish and English law systems, and you could also put that as civil law and common law legal systems, are there any features of the former, the Spanish legal system that was implanted upon what is now Ecuador, Natty? Are there any features of your legal system that might make it easier to recognize the rights of nature than common law? What do you think?
I don't think that one system makes it easier than the other. I think that it gives us different tools. Like we have, for example, in Ecuador, this tool that is called Acción de Protección, a protection action, that actually allows us to, is the tool that we normally use for the implementation of the rights of nature. So I don't think one system is better off than the other. I just feel that we actually, for countries and like especially Commonwealth countries, many times it's more difficult to change the constitution.
Yes.
Whereas I think
that's exactly right.
That's one point, like we in Ecuador is our 20th constitution. We are hoping that is the last one, but it's we can change it in an easier way. And of course, with rights of nature provisions, a constitution can be amended for sure, and we can have laws that, as I have explained before. But I think that that's like maybe like the main difference, and that we have different tools. But it's not that it's impossible or unviable.
Thank you. And again, for the Australian audience, we have a very concretized, stable legal system that doesn't have major revolutions or changes very often. That's good, but it's also bad. And I think the history of our modern constitution in Australia since 1901, we've had 42 referenda, and only 6 have been yes votes nationally. So to get the entire nation to vote for anything is very hard. We're sort of conservative in that respect. And just before we wrap up with Natty and move to Grant, I'm having quite the day. There is a comment. Oh, Osprey, did you want to make a comment? Yeah, I welcome that, particularly that civil law, common law discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief comment. I know that we need to move on.
No, it's good. It's good. We got time.
Okay. I think whatever country we're talking about, I think what's really key when we're talking about rights of nature is that we're looking at changing the very structure and DNA of law and earth jurisprudence. And so the one example I would give is that right now, when we look country by country, we see environmental laws that are really regulatory laws, and they do just that. They regulate how much harm a company can do, how much harm the government can do to the environment. So it's all about regulating harms. It's not about stopping harms. And I think that's really the crux of the matter when we're looking at property law and seeing nature as property, is that it throws the forests, the rivers, the land, the oceans into a market-based economy and a legal framework of property, as you were saying earlier, Michelle. And that's really the intervention that we're trying to have with rights of nature, is to move nature out of the marketplace, out of these market-based economies, and to see nature as a life-bearing entity and the source of life, as we're all saying, and move it out of this regulatory system, because that's where we see corporations and governments continually pressing into waterways and into the land and into forests, because they, through our current capitalistic economic extractive system, we see the endless economic growth model of extracting from the land and extracting more of the fish out of the oceans and extracting more oil out of the ground and extracting more wood from the forests. And so as long as we're in that system of regulating harm, we never actually get to stopping the harm and reversing the conversation to say, what does the forest need to thrive and grow? What is the river saying about the river's capacity to flow and be healthy and thrive? What does the ocean need to thrive and be healthy? And that perspective is giving nature a voice, nature rights, versus looking at the property and ownership of humans and our constant consumption habits that are destroying, as we can see, all of nature right now and putting us in this terrible crisis. So I think that's really important. When whatever country we're talking about, we're looking at regulatory laws versus changing the core dynamics of how we relate to nature.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Osprey. And quick plug for Ayla. One of the reasons that we've helped auspice the New Economy Network Australia is to directly take on those economic conversations, because in Australia, when you talk about rights of nature or obligations of people to care for country, we're always hammered with economic growth. So we then designed this entire movement to be questioning the very role of the economy, to focus it on we should have an economy that cares for the earth. And so we're kind of combining all these intense conversations, desperately trying to push back at what we have here in Australia, which someone once described as the last minerals colony on earth, but I don't like to think of us that way. We're far more the home of wombats, much more important. But thank you so much for those comments, Osprey. And Natty, thank you so much for sharing those updates. I'm hoping that Ayla can invite you all to give these wonderful chats and updates more regularly from now on. So we hope to see you again very soon. But thank you for your time, Natty. And I'll now rearrange the spotlight and I'll get my order right. Grant, would you like to come and join us again for a bit of a chat? Thanks so much. Let me remove some spotlights and do my magical things with buttons. Gosh, I love buttons, she said sarcastically. There we are. No, there we go. Grant, how are you and where are you today?
Hi, everyone. I'm Grant Wilson, Executive Director at Earth Law Center. I'm doing great. I'm in Durango, Colorado, on the territory of the Ute people. And if you've ever been to Durango, there's a train that goes through town and you can hear it in the background right now.
That's wonderful. That's awesome. Well, Grant, thank you for joining us. I'm a huge fan of the work of the Earth Law Center. And just recently we had a little session with the Ocean Rights and Kinship Network, where we heard from one of your colleagues about the Universal Declaration for the Rights of Oceans. But I'm really looking forward to you sharing with us an update about all the work you're doing and where you're working and what's been going on. So thank you, Grant.
That's great. Can you see these slides, I think?
Yes, it's all working well. Thank you.
Okay, and it's the version without notes on it, I'm sure, right?
Yes, it's just the slides. You've done well.
Okay. Yes, good. Okay, if I can handle technology, it's a good day. So I already introduced myself. I'm just going to give you some updates of some rights of nature issues that I've been involved in, or some of our partners have been involved in that haven't been covered yet. And just real quick about us, Earth Law Center advances Earth-centered laws, legal movements, and relationships, including the rights of nature. If you just need a really simple way of figuring out what it means to advocate for nature's own interests, I dug up this photo of me with a sign when I was 5 years old saying, "Save the oceans for the fish." And that's what Rights of Nature is all about, is protecting nature for the sake of nature, not just for human benefits. We work on the rights of nature and other Earth-centered legal movements like animal rights and the rights of future generations and guardianship of nature. And many people on this call contributed to a legal textbook on these topics, which I encourage anyone to check out. And I think, one important thing, I think a lot of people here are very familiar with the rights of nature and Earth-centered law, but I thought I'd point out just a couple differences between that and environmental law, just to kind of understand the distinction. Under environmental law, which kind of are the traditional air, water, soil protections, despite doing a lot of good work to protect ecosystems, they really treat humans and nature as being separate from each other. Whereas ecocentric law, including the rights of nature, understands that humans and nature are interconnected and part of a single web of life. Traditional environmental laws have a goal of less degradation, slowing down the rate of loss, but never reversing it. Whereas ecocentric law and the rights of nature is about regeneration and restoration, actually restoring ecosystems to health. And under environmental law, nature and future generations actually don't have a formal voice. It's all about humans who are alive today, who have standing or a voice in the legal system. And under ecocentric law, including the rights of nature, you can give a voice to the voiceless. And there's all sorts of interesting ways to do this, such as through legal guardians. This is just some of the places Earth Law Center is working right now with our partners across the world. So definitely global. And I'm just going to highlight a couple quick case studies today of things that you might want to pay attention to, and here's a list of them. And I'm going to start off with Panama. Just this year, Panama passed a national law recognizing the rights of nature, which is really exciting. And kind of the lead advocates for it were youth, young people, which I think is really cool. I've got maybe 1 or 2 years left that I can call myself young. This was Juan Diego Vasquez Gutierrez. He's a 26-year-old legislator in Panama, and he worked with the Leatherback Project, which is led by a youth leader in the environmental space, and got legal support for a variety of other groups such as Earth Law Center, and passed a national law saying nature has rights in Panama, which is really exciting. And there were some other interesting legal principles that were integrated into this law. In dubio pro natura, when in doubt, protect nature. Stuff like this helps lawmakers, judges figure out how to rule on complicated cases where the rights of nature might come up, but there's other interests that are opposing the rights of nature. And sometimes you need a little guidance along the way to help judges figure out how to handle complex fact patterns. And so basically these were included in the law to provide some guidance there. Precautionary principle and restoration is key to the rights of nature. We need to restore ecosystems to health, and this is all in the law. It goes into effect at the end of this year, basically, and there's going to be a lot of follow-up work. So if you're interested in Panama, keep an eye on that. And you'll see I have some various shout outs in these slides. There's all these great groups doing rights of nature work that can't be here today, so I just dropped in some shout outs so people can at least recognize their names or know of their existence if you don't already. We already heard about Chile, and I second everything that Natalia Green said. There's going to be another chance in Chile. Rights of nature in their proposed constitution is not why it didn't pass, and I'm pretty confident it'll be there in the ultimate constitution that is approved in Chile. So definitely keep an eye on that. I'm a lawyer in the United States, and so if you're in the United States, these are some of the hot spots where there's rights of nature stuff happening. There's lots more, and probably various people on the call are horrified that I didn't include states where you're probably working in right now, but these are some of the ones I knew of. And a couple to highlight here are the Pacific Northwest and Washington State and Idaho, where there's movements for the rights of rivers and orca populations. And I think the orca populations thing is interesting because the rights of nature doesn't have to be only about ecosystem, but there's populations of animals that can benefit from rights of nature protections as well. There's also an anti-rights of nature movement in the United States, which I'm kind of shocked about, because I'm like, wow, that means rights of nature has finally made it if there's an anti-rights of nature movement. And there's a variety of states, such as Florida and Idaho, that have passed anti-rights of nature laws, which I actually think could be a good thing, because if there's anti-rights of nature laws, there's going to be people who are passing pro-rights of nature laws. So I think it's going to really help propel forth supporters who might have been a little bit quiet and now want to do something good for the rights of nature, but definitely something to pay attention to there. In Utah and Colorado, we're working with a group called Save the Colorado to pass a little bit friendlier, gentler rights of nature resolutions that really try to give nature a voice in local communities. So let's say someone on this call lives in a country where they don't think the federal government's quite ready for the rights of nature. Maybe they think local governments don't have enough authority to do a really strong rights of nature law that can, get corporations in the courts to stop from polluting. You might be able to do something like giving nature a voice in your local community, figure out how to speak for nature, have nature give input on environmental laws and regulations and so forth. And that's kind of what's happening in Utah and Colorado. And then in New York, there's some great work happening, including some proposed state legislation and a group called Talking Wings that is running a great educational campaign with the local community. Mexico, just to the south of here, has a thriving rights of nature movement that's a little bit quieter than some places, but it's really exciting, with multiple states recognizing the rights of nature and national legislation now being considered. And that's a place where there's a council of guardians being developed for watersheds, where each watershed has a guardian, and then together collectively they serve on a council. And that's something I'm seeing a lot more of, is kind of how does nature become integrated into democracy? And you have to get into politics, into legislation, into voting. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there, and Mexico's one of those places. Internationally, there's all sorts of rights of nature stuff happening. One to keep an eye on is the Convention on Biological Diversity, where their December COP, or Conference of Parties, there's bracketed text on the rights of Mother Earth in a document that's basically how the treaty will be interpreted over the next 10 years. And we, in a large coalition, I think 120 supporters, have been working on this. And so definitely, if you're into advocacy, this is a great opportunity to have your voice heard. And anything that's happening internationally, be sure to, as Natalia Green said, check out the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, because they're all over the globe doing great work. And any country you're in, they almost certainly have a friend there. So definitely reach out to them. Also internationally, there's work towards universal declarations of the rights of Mother Earth, the rights of rivers, and ocean rights. And so kind of trying to build international support at a really high level. And these are all advancing to various degrees. And we heard a little bit about Indigenous-led approaches before, so I don't have too much to add, except that there's Indigenous-led rights of nature work, and that's really exciting and happening in by sovereign tribal nations and Indigenous groups all over the globe. And there's also some relationship-based legal paradigms that are outside of the realm of rights, but parallel in many ways the rights of nature, that are developing as well. And so lots of nuances and discussion there. Something to follow that I think is really promising as well. And finally, lots of great education work. These are just 3 books on the rights of nature and ecocentric law that I encourage you to check out. And the first one's a legal textbook. The second one is all about the politics and background, especially with a lot on Ecuador. And the third one is by the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, David Boyd. And if anyone's interested in teaching these topics in law school and in university and in high school and in grade school, there's curricula being developed for all these places. There's books, there's programs, and I encourage anyone to reach out. And these are just a few of the many books you have to see. Oh, and of course, Wild Law by Cormac Cullinan, which inspired almost everyone I know in this space to join it. So be sure to check that out as well. Last slide, how Earth Law Center can help. We can provide legal support, we can do legal drafting, we write briefs, and if we can't do it, we love referring people to our many great partners that we work with. And everything we do is in collaboration with local groups and other folks in the space. So feel free to reach out. And I hope that was helpful. If there's any information I can provide on any of those campaigns, which I know is quick and all over the globe, feel free to reach out.
Quick and all over the globe. It's a great description. Excellent. Thank you, Grant. Can I just ask a couple of quick questions about some of the work you're doing, just for clarification? So can you talk a little bit, and feel free to stop sharing screen if you'd like folks to see you more close up, or not if you don't want them to.
I'll risk it.
I was just wondering if you could mention a little more about the Universal Declaration for the Rights of Rivers and the Universal Declaration for the Oceans.
Yeah, they're both civil society-led initiatives that basically say whether or not you recognize it in law, the oceans have rights, and so do rivers. And a fundamental premise of the rights of nature is that these rights exist. They are inherent to nature's existence, just as the drafters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognize that human rights are inherent to our own existence. And so, putting them into declaration form is just sort of a way of memorializing those rights that already exist. The Rivers Declaration was drafted by a big coalition of civil society groups. It's available on rightsofrivers.org, and it's basically meant to serve as a legislative starting point for any country that's interested in legislating the rights of rivers, or to inspire you in whatever other way you see fit. It's open source. It's a gift to the planet. No one really owns it. And then the Universal Declaration of Ocean Rights is similarly, a group project. It's open for anyone who's interested to participate and advocate for it. There was a meeting on it in New York last week where various heads of state and governmental representatives attended and showed their support, and just something that's starting to develop. The oceans, especially the high seas, are actually a really interesting place for the rights of nature because nobody owns the high seas. That's already recognized in international law. So there's kind of not like this tug of war or debate over property rights because the high seas are not owned by anyone. We manage them collectively, and why can't that collective management transition into something that's stewardship and actually giving the ocean its own voice? So yeah, these are campaigns that kind of a variety of groups started, including Earth Law Center and many, many, many others, and are kind of out there in the world and hopefully become self-sufficient and are starting to be. So if you're interested in oceans or rivers, please get involved. And then, the third one I mentioned there was the originator of this idea of universal declarations for nature, Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth. And that's existed for 15 years, and it's inspired countless rights of nature initiatives. And there's a movement with signature gathering online to have it endorsed at the UN, and you can check out that website, which is just Rights of Mother Earth online, and there's an organization behind it. It's really great stuff.
Thank you, Grant. That's a great update. And I actually should have asked Natty to speak about, because Natty and Cormac and Osprey and Shannon and Mari were all there when they developed that Declaration for the Rights of Mother Earth. So I'm an interloper. I think I turned up in the scene about a year later or a year or two later. And just a reminder for our Aussie audiences, for a lot of the rights of nature stuff, if you want to have a yarn to the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, what we've been slowly exploring is first laws and the laws of obligation. What Mary Graham, an Indigenous elder from the Yugambeh Nation, talks about is the relationship-based culture and governance system that was been successful for more than 60,000 years. The longest continuous culture on Earth is right here on this beautiful continent. So please connect to the international initiatives. AILA certainly promotes them where we can, but if you're interested in the much quieter movements around connecting rights of nature thinking, but imbuing it with our local custodial but Indigenous approaches, that's where we're working. Kind of slowly in the background, and a whole bunch of stuff's going to be emerging later this year and early next year. And I really wanted to mention that because a lot of Aussies sit back and hear a lot of this rights-based, and there's a gentle reluctance in Australia to really bang the gong for rights. But what we're saying is rights of nature is a spearhead concept. And unfortunately, Shrishti from India can't join us today. Her internet is too dodgy. She's traveling in the mountainous area. in a mountainous area. And she and I and a few others were on a panel recently, and it emerged that a lot of groups are starting to look deep into their own local cultures to see how they bring back certain traditions and try to sit in partnership with a rights-based approach without being dominated by a rights-based discourse when it's not part of their culture. So it's a really interesting space. And I just mentioned that as almost as a counterpoint, particularly for folks in our audience who are from Australia. It's slightly different approach, but there's many good things happening, which I'll talk about later. And the universalism of universal rights of nature and the universal rights of all oceans is a fantastic way to get attention into the international space, but remembering that the local small-scale cultural work is also going on at the same time. So multi-scales, it's not an either or, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It just has to be loving nature in whatever form or phase we get that through. International level, ram home these big international decks, and at home, let's get those local movements happening to care for rivers, creeks, wombats, koalas, and platypi. Excellent.
Michelle, if I could just say, you know, as you just heard there's lots of nuance to the rights of nature. It's kind of a simple, elegant concept, nature having rights, but then there's all this nuance as you dive deeper into our legal systems and many of the colonial natures. And so it does require, you know, kind of this strong, cohesive message, but then also this careful and deep understanding. And, you know, Australian Earth Laws Alliance does that as well as anyone in the world to kind of, you know, embrace the nuance, not overlook it, and really chew on it and come up with something that's meaningful. And I think if you do that hard work, which is really hard and can be challenging, the end result is a lot better. So, you know, the work you're doing in Australia, just to highlight that, because I think you brought in all these other people to talk about your own, our work, and hopefully we get to dive into your work as well, which is really
Thanks for the plug, Grant. No, I'm always fascinated to keep up to date with what everyone's doing, so it's really great to hear what everyone's up to. And yeah, sometimes it's interesting. I mean, it's different. North America, South America, we all have these colonial challenges as well. When I hear folks talking in Europe, they've got a very different mindset because they're working in a different context. So places like Australia, New Zealand, India, all the Americas have got these multiple layers of laws, and it's very complex, and we all have to work in the culturally appropriate way. So, and that's the beauty of the work, I think, getting to know place very deeply and the peoples within that place. So wonderful. Look, I'm aware that we've all been sitting still for an hour and 20 minutes. Can I please invite you all to have an indulgent bio break, run outside and grab a tree, or go to the loo, or have a cup of tea. But let's thank Grant and our previous speakers, Mari and Natty and Grant, with lovely comments from Osprey and Shannon. Let's take a 5-6 minute break, come back, and we'll have the wonderful Osprey, Shannon, Margaret give us an update about their work.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for organizing this amazing session. And I really appreciate all of the wisdom and words from all the speakers so far. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. My name is Osprey Oriel Lake, and I am the founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN. And I'm also on the executive committee of the Global Alliance Rights of Nature, or GARN. And I'm zooming in from Coast Miwok lands, which is in Northern California. And I just really want to acknowledge the homelands that I'm on. I really wanted to talk about two topics for this session. One is on the International Rights of Nature Tribunals, which I've been very engaged in as an executive committee member of GARN, and also a new campaign, or it's fairly new, on Antarctica that I think is really interesting, that I wanted to dive into. So in regards to the tribunals, one of the things, as we've been discussing in the session, is just how important education is to the flourishing of the rights of nature movement. And one of the things that we've been doing at GARN for many years now is to hold these tribunals, which basically demonstrate what would it look like if the Universal Declaration of Rights of Mother Earth were actually implemented. And we tried cases with the idea that Mother Earth, that nature has rights. And so they're sort of mock tribunals, but with very serious, real cases. And we bring in Indigenous leaders, impacted communities to tell their stories. We back that up with different information around these cases so people understand what is happening on the ground, whether it's a fracking issue or deforestation or harms to a river, and really present these cases before a group of judges who then determine if there's in fact been a violation to rights of nature. And also it's been important because we're intersecting also with human rights, because we know that it's very important that land defenders, as an example from Latin America, which has some of the highest rates of killings of land defenders, have an opportunity to also tell their stories in terms of how we defend the defenders who are protecting nature. So it's been very powerful also to hold these tribunals specifically during the United Nations climate talks in parallel to them, so that we show an alternative offering to market-based solutions, and also the idea of how do we resolve the climate crisis through the lens of nature as property, and saying, no, we need to get nature out of the marketplace. That's the same system that got us into these crises in the first place. And what else can we do? And what other views can we have on a different form of Earth jurisprudence of how we're going to move forward to have a healthy and just future? So last year, as an example, at the climate talks in Glasgow, we did two main cases, one on the Amazon rainforest and one on climate change and who are the actors in causing climate change, like the fossil fuel industry. And so there's a whole variety of cases that we've done over the years. And I would invite people to go to the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature website, where you can see a lot of the video footage that we've collected over the years. So you can really learn about these tribunals, the different cases, and it's a really great introduction to the rights of nature work overall. And I would just say that, you know, the tribunals are really based on how we know we're living in a time in which we really have to change everything about how we're living with Mother Earth and each other. And of course, the urgency of the climate and ecological crises really demand that we completely redesign our economic, social, and legal systems. And our global movement for rights of nature, we're really looking for a revolutionary and evolutionary change for society. And I think at the heart of it, we're asking, you know, how do we transform our really horrifically dysfunctional environmental laws and neoliberal economic systems that are destroying people and planet? And that's what's exciting about this work. It's a new model. I do want to acknowledge, as we've talked about some so far in the session, that much of the vision and worldview of rights of nature framework comes from Indigenous peoples around the world and their knowledge of the natural laws of Mother Earth. And I think we have just so much to learn from original instructions of our Indigenous sisters and brothers, which deeply inform the core principles of rights of nature. And, you know, after decades of environmental protection laws, you know, when we look at our modern legal systems, they've really failed to prevent the increasingly grave threats of global warming, degradation of Earth's sacred systems of life, and the growing displacement and death of humans and other species. And there's particular concern for Indigenous and frontline communities who bear the worst impacts of disasters because of environmental racism and other societal injustices. So to truly live sustainably and live in harmony with the earth and each other, we need to change the very foundations, the very structure of our legal frameworks to respect the natural laws and the dignity of everyone. And this new configuration really recognizes that Earth's living systems are not the enslaved property of humans. And it's a primary premise of the rights of nature movement that we need to change our system for there to be an assurance of a thriving future. And we need to reorient human life to not be exploitive and ultimately self-destructive to relationships with nature, and to one where we really honor the deep interrelationship of life. So at the tribunals, we're really advocating that breaking out of human-centered limitations of our current legal systems is actually one of the most transformative and highly leveraged actions that humans can take to create a healthy and just future for all. And as we see climate disruption and environmental degradation increase globally, I don't think it can be more important to highlight that exploitation and extractivism is actually the result of patriarchal societies, colonization, racism, and neoliberal capitalism, which are based upon the same systems and ideologies of power over and exploitation of women, Indigenous peoples, people of color, and the land. So it's really clear that the global community needs to address these systems of oppression in an intersectional manner to move towards justice and real solutions. And Rights of Nature can really offer a vital path forward to this intersectional effort, which is needed given the scope of the crises we face. So that's really sort of an idea about the tribunals and what we're really trying to achieve. And again, I would just suggest people look at the library that we have on the GARN website to learn more about that work that's happening globally. And then the second topic I wanted to bring up is that this year I'm really honored to work with a group of academics, lawyers, and scientists, Indigenous leaders, to launch a campaign for rights of nature for the Antarctica region. And we're looking to launch this campaign more broadly during COP27, which is happening in November. And the idea is set forth to create principles to guide the drafting eventually of the Antarctica Declaration to be governed by rights of nature as an entire ecosystem. And the intention is to use the declaration as a basis for building popular support for a new approach to the whole Antarctic region by demonstrating the value of applying rights of nature as the central governance approach. And although Antarctica is often referred to as the continent of Antarctica, the term is used here in our principles and declaration in a wider sense to refer to the whole ecological community associated with both the continent and the surrounding waters of the Southern Ocean. And the starting point is really of the principles is Antarctica itself. The principles which, how do we guide humans to relate to Antarctica? We need to be informed by our understanding of the nature of Antarctica and the natural forces that have given rise to and maintain this unique ecosystem. Any system to govern how humans relate to Antarctica, and any region for that fact, need to be designed to be aligned with the realities of the region, like Antarctica, rather than being influenced by colonial claims of governance based on discovery and occupation. And we've been talking in this session about, decolonizing how we think about nature. And I think it's really important to remove ourselves from the idea of discovery and occupation of lands. And again, we can really learn a lot from our Indigenous sisters and brothers about this. Antarctica is an ecological community of interrelated beings. This includes the continent, the sea, the winds, the ocean currents, the upwellings, the ice sheets, and the shelves, and the many different organisms that live there. And the Antarctica is vital to the ecological stability, ordering and functioning of the Earth as a whole. It plays a very important role in determining the climate, ocean currents, winds, and again, supports a vast number of organisms. The continental ice of Antarctica retains vast quantities of water, as we all know, which if they were to melt would cause huge global sea level rise and inundate cities and fertile farmlands. So it means that really every person has a reason to protect Antarctica. So that's another really interesting part of this campaign, which is Michelle was mentioning earlier, which I really loved, how we need to really dig into where we live in our local communities and bring rights of nature to where we live to protect our particular watershed, our forests, our lakes, everywhere where we live needs us to have nature have a voice and for us to stand up for rights of nature in our local communities. It's absolutely critical to know where we live and how to protect our regions. And I think that's where this work starts, in our own communities, in our own bioregions. But we're also looking at this very large scale campaign with Antarctica, because we also need to globalize the movement. And again, when we're looking at ice melt, because not only are we in really a climate crisis, we're in an ice crisis. When we lose this this ice in Antarctica and the Arctic for that matter, this is going to impact everyone. So we're looking at how can we also bring the world's attention to rights of nature through this collective campaign that will impact everybody. Everybody will be impacted by sea level rise. Antarctic has many unique ecological qualities and plays an enormously significant role in regulating the global climate and weather systems, including absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. So again, when we're looking at Antarctica, we're talking about climate mitigation that is essential to the survival of all of humanity. And despite the fact that 7 countries have territorial claims to parts of Antarctica, it is not part of any country. So this makes it also really unique. And it is regulated by a group of countries under what's called the Antarctic Treaty System. And this means that it presents this opportunity to develop a new vision of how humans could relate to Antarctica, precisely because there's sort of an openness as to the governance structure right now. And so again, it's another opportunity for us to globalize the rights of nature movement and look at a different form of governance and relationship to natural systems and how we might really transform the property-based system into one in which we are giving nature rights and listening to what will be best for Antarctica and the protection of the ice sheet and the ice that we are so dependent upon all over the world. So I'm really excited about this campaign. I think it'll be very important also to learn from Indigenous peoples and their views. We've begun to reach out to different Indigenous leaders. I've been doing some research on Maori relationships with Antarctica and how we can understand ancient stories and culture and relationship to Antarctica that Indigenous people have held in this region for millennium.
Yes, so thank you, Osprey. And I'll just see if there's any questions for you. We've got a number there was something about the tribunal. Some folks send me private notes and others, they're more in the public. So Susan just has a comment. As a layperson, the tribunals bring the message out of academic or opinionated media that we're normally informed by and bring a much needed sobriety and to the depth of cases. So much appreciated. And I have a question here saying, what are some of the cases that the tribunals heard? Which ones should we look to, the most recent ones, to try to see how the best example of seeing how rights of nature is applied? Any tips, Osprey, or are they all good and we should watch them all?
Yeah, I would dare not say which ones to watch or not, but what I think would be a helpful guide is, when you go to our website, you'll see the different years and the different case studies, and that people should let their own interests guide them because there's quite a bit of data. Everything, as I mentioned, from the Amazon rainforest to the climate case. I think a really interesting case that maybe Shannon will want to touch upon was there was a case we presented when we were in Bonn, Germany, during one of the climate talks on Bolivia, and a particular road called the Tipnis that was going through one of the forests. Very controversial, very much in opposition to Indigenous rights and obviously protection for the natural systems of the forest there. And that case actually resulted in an uproar in Bolivia, and the president there actually having to comment and backpedal the going forward of the Tipnis roadway because of the particular tribunal that we had. So it had on the ground real-time effects. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I think that it's really important to point out that these tribunals are not sort of happening in an ethereal space. There is actually impact and advocacy that people who are working on the ground on rights of nature can use to push their agenda, because now there has been publicity around this case and people have heard the case, and it has been developed through the tribunal. So I think that there is real-time impact as well as an educational component. And I would just suggest people follow their interests when they look, because the data is vast. There's been a lot of tribunals. And so they are happening as international tribunals, but there's also been localized tribunals that have been sort of branching off in different communities that are also part of the database of the tribunals that have been held.
And I'll just mention to everyone that after the 2014 tribunal, AILA created our own Australian People's Tribunal for Community and Nature's Rights, tribunal.org.au. We have space to create citizens' inquiries and also what we call ecological justice cases, which are more adversarial. And probably the most significant citizens' inquiry that the APT ran with Indigenous elders and lawyers all volunteering their time was going out and talking to communities for many weeks along the Darling Barker River and documenting community concerns and ways forward in a framework of protecting the law of obligation and nature's rights. So Australia's got its own civil society space, all volunteer-led, no funding, and pretty amazing. And that report for the 2019 tribunal nearly killed me. It was 230 pages of editing, up more than 110 video testimonies of people suffering profound and continuing to suffer profound legal, political, and economic structural problems killing the river. So it's really obvious, it's really blatant. And this work is important because some people will go, well, you're not from the government, what can you do? It's like, well, it's actually about sharing voices and showing a different way forward. So I really do think that that's deeply important. Osprey, could you talk a little bit more about the timeline for the work that you guys are doing for the Antarctic? Do you have a sort of a plan ahead for when you want to have a new declaration or what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, right now the plan is to launch the Antarctica campaign during COP27, which is happening in November of this year, and then probably a second launch on Antarctica Day, which take place in December of this year. So there'll be like a series of launch dates. And what we want to do, and the plan is to launch the invitation of the principles, as I was mentioning earlier. So it's a set of principles to then actually have an assembly to form the declaration, because our experience in this work, and I'm sure others have also as you are campaigning and building movements, is that if you sort of show up with the end product, if you will, it's not as inviting for people to engage and participate. So we want to put forth the principles to then invite people to an international assembly in 2023. We haven't picked a date for that yet, but there would be an assembly in which we invite civil society, governments, other stakeholders, Indigenous leaders to come and finalize and together create a declaration that, you know, we can bring all the different parties together. We're also actively working with the Indigenous Council from the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature to ensure Indigenous leadership in this work for all the reasons that have been discussed on this forum so far, is that we're really recognizing, you know, that the foundation of Indigenous rights is based upon ancient knowledge and wisdom and views and paradigms that come from Indigenous peoples. And so it's really critical that we uplift their role in this Antarctica campaign and how these principles and declarations will roll out. It's very important that we have Indigenous leadership, because we are really relying on their wisdom and knowledge about right relationship of reciprocity and respect from the natural laws of the earth. So we're ensuring that that component is woven in from the onset. That's really important to all of us, that that takes place. And right now, I'm personally doing some really interesting research on the Maori from New Zealand and their stories in relationship to Antarctica, because no one actually lives on Antarctica. And so who's been in relationship and, you know, being in that region is, you know, primarily Indigenous people who have been the first to be there, and particularly the Maori having stories about the relationship with that particular region and the oceans and the ice cap there.
That's wonderful. And I'd love to, I know there's a couple of Australians like, I think Alessandro Palazon are involved, but if AILA can be of assistance bringing in some of the communities, particularly around the base of Australia, where you look south and the next piece of real estate is the Antarctic, then there'd be, I think, some lovely opportunities to integrate some of that. So that sounds great. Thank you.
We'd love to, you know, connect with you, and we definitely, you know, after this forum can reach out and have a fuller discussion and arrange a call with you to weave you in. I mean, this is very nascent in some ways. I mean, it's been going on, but it's at its beginning stages. So we really welcome you and everyone else who wants to be engaged.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So I hope everyone on this call keeps an eye on it, because the Antarctic is a place that Australians have, for better or for worse, through the colonial stuff, been involved in through a long-term process. And also we've got, literally our federal departments have an Antarctic division. We've got some of the world's leading scientists who kind of connect with all the work down there. Not that I know anything about snow and ice. I'm a Queensland girl living in the subtropics. But Australia has a connection in modern times, and I'm sure there's some pretty amazing stories from the from other folks. So thank
It would
you.
be so great. And I think I just wanted to mention also, so people know, that the Antarctic Treaty System includes Argentina, Australia, France, New Zealand, Norway, the UK, US, Chile as consultative parties, just so people understand, that it's not owned by those countries, so to speak, but those are the consultative bodies that we also need to be in relationship with.
Yeah, and I'd love to see Australia play a role in thinking about the future of the Antarctic more formally, as well as through civil society groups. So anything we can do, we'd love to help. It's interesting, actually. I mean, you may not know this, but we have friends who go down there for 6 months. Like I've got a mate who's gone down for a research project, and they're kind of hugging penguins and tagging things. And so the relationships between Aussies and Antarctic is something that's kind of in the back of our minds in the conservation space, but not all of us would ever go there. So it is very interesting. And I'm just noting that Natty's saying, yeah, thanks, Michelle, that would be fun or amazing. And there is an Asian Oceania hub for the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature that wants to emerge. Yes, and I've been in some conversations with folks in India and the Philippines and other places. And there's lots of discussions about what's possible, and we are a fairly vast and incredibly diverse region, so we'll see what happens. And Ayla was, through Alex, myself, we're one of the founding members of GAN and are still a member of GAN, so it's all good. We've just been super busy at home focusing on this gigantic continent doing good deeds. But thank you so much, Osprey. That was a really wonderful update. And we will be in touch for various topics and reasons, and to also get some more recordings of your lovely talk about the Antarctic. So thank you, Osprey. So I might hand over to Shannon next. I do want to check on Margaret Stewart, though. She is literally sitting in an office listening to the horror show Typhoon Cyclone in Florida. Are you okay, Margaret?
So far, so good. The lights did just flicker, but I think we'll make it through the rest of
Are you sure?
webinar just fine. Yeah, I think we're good.
I'm in deep admiration of your commitment to be sitting in an office waiting for your turn to talk. But thank you so much. Well, in which case we'll jump to Shannon and then we'll come to Margaret. So thanks so much. Shannon Biggs, it's been some time since you and I had a chat. It's lovely to see you. What have you been up to, Ms. Biggs?
Well, thank you so much for hosting this incredible gathering and rich discussion. And my name is Shannon Biggs. I come from the occupied Ramaytush Ohlone territory, also known as San Francisco. And I'm co-founder of the Indigenous and women-led movement Rights, which works on sort of the apex of climate justice, Indigenous rights, and rights of nature. And I've just come back from in the last couple of days from the heartland, some might call it, in the Plains region of Ponca, the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma, where we had a 2-day event celebrating and activating people in the region, particularly tribes coming together around the rights of rivers. The Ponca, on July 6th, passed the rights of rivers into law on their tribal land. It was not the first time they've recognized rights of nature. In 2016, we were honored to assist the Ponca Nation and Casey Camp Hornick, who's also one of the principal founders of Movement Rights, to become the first to recognize in tribal law and statute, recognizing the rights of nature. on their tribal territory. And since then, and before that, actually, there's been an emergence of indigenous interest in the rights of nature on Turtle Island, which is what the indigenous people of this land consider the United States and Canada. And the gathering that we had over the last 2 days is really quite powerful, because it came from a very different place. Yes, this is Earth jurisprudence, but just to add a little bit more flavor to the work that we all share on this call. And yes, we're working to change law and shift culture. But in particular, recognizing that Indigenous people have a special and particularly poignant role in the rights of nature movement, as some have mentioned earlier. Mari, for example, said that, yes, this is, we're talking about shifting Western legal traditions, but this work really comes from Indigenous cosmology that understands the appropriate role for humans in right relationship with the system of life, not as owners of it, and not separate from it. And that particular piece of this work that Rights of Nature is also seeking to bridge is about a culture shift as much as it is the legal shift. And they go hand in hand, as we know. But for example, the Ponca, in recognizing the rights of the rivers that flow through their territory. And just to give some context, and I have permission from Casey Camp Hornick, who's leading this effort for her. She's the environmental ambassador for the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma. And for those of you who don't live in Turtle Island, just to say that where the Ponca live, and Oklahoma is a fossil fuel state. It is dominated by fossil fuels. In Ponca territory, they can't grow organic food within 16 miles. They are dying of cancers and autoimmune diseases from the effects of fossil fuel industry. You can take a toxic tour of Ponca standing in one place and just looking in any direction at the pump jacks for fracking. They became the earthquake epicenter of the world as a result of fracking. They can no longer drink their own well water. The Ponca must buy their water from the city, which is actually their own water. This, for them, is what they call environmental genocide of their people at the hands of the fossil fuel industry. The whole state is geared around the governor. One time we were there, held a day of prayer for the fossil fuel companies and for fossil fuel jobs. And so when we look at what it means to do rights of nature work in places like that, we really have to consider rights of nature. We have to confront the idea that a lot of people don't have negative information, even though there are all these earthquakes and all of these things that the state of Oklahoma doesn't say anything but great things about. This is a jobs bringer. A lot of tribes are poor and rely on fossil fuel industry jobs. They don't have any choice. So when we talk about rights of nature and being in right relationship, we have to also see it as a cultural shift and a system change shift. And that includes ideas like land back. It includes ideas like rematriating the land. It includes ideas like indigenous just transition. How do we begin to move from where we are now to what can be. And for Indigenous peoples, all of these, all of these things, like the legal piece is fine, but it's also about recognizing that in a place that has been considered a sacrifice zone for the fossil fuel industry, that is literally killing them, and they, they can't fish, they can't do their traditional hunting. They're, they open up the, if they hunt a deer or a fish, there are black things inside that don't belong there. Everything is poisoned in that area. So from these areas of sacrifice zones, from Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, come the most innovative solutions to how we're going to create change. And one of the things that struck me, Michelle, was when we were, as I live in California, in a drought that's in a 1,000-year state that's in a 1,000-year drought, and hearing about the fires in Australia, and that the Aboriginal people said, we have ancient fire techniques to manage to manage these activities, and that there is these original teachings of people who've lived in these places since time immemorial have things to teach us about how to make the transition. And part of Rights of Nature, in addition to recognizing this in law, is also to, for us, is also letting Indigenous people lead this work in ways that maybe we didn't dream of or think about at the beginning. But they're also the first people to stand for ideas like Mini-Wachoni at Standing Rock, water is life, and that they're willing to put their bodies on the line to protect upstream and downstream, not just for their own territory, but for everybody. And I think those are concepts that belong in the Rights of Nature, sort of playbook, if you will, as much as just as writing the law, as important as that piece is. This is a bridge. And what are we willing to do? What are we going to tell our grandchildren about what we did in this time? And for all of us working in the Rights of Nature movement, it's a powerful, potent time to be a part of the fastest growing environmental movement in history. And that this leadership, and recognizing the leadership, as much as all of us have supported this work from the legal side, and all of those pieces, that there is a rhythm and a cadence and a way of moving forward that Indigenous people have to teach us, and why they're such a critical part of this work, and why Ecuador, as over 50% Indigenous people, there was a cultural awareness of these ideas already embedded in the primary culture. And here in the United States, there are still people who think that Native Americans are something from the past that belong in a John Wayne movie. And so giving voice and elevating those struggles and elevating those solutions and that traditional knowledge is, I think, a really important piece of how we move this work forward and how they begin to work together. So my last comment, I just want to say the gathering for us was, here you have the Ponca recognizing the rights of the rivers in their territory. And they have guardians for those rivers. It's called the Patata Society, that the women's society that has been there since time immemorial. It's not written on paper anywhere, but those are the traditional guardians. And Casey is a member of the Patata Hereditary Society as the river guardians. And the idea that along the Arkansas and Salt Fork rivers that they've recognized rights for is about connecting the tribes along those rivers and to have regional gatherings on the equinox, which is why we just had our first of 4 gatherings, 4 being a sacred number as well for Native American communities and lots of other indigenous tribes, to host these gatherings in different places and bring indigenous peoples together around these ideas. And that it doesn't include just talking about rights of nature, because in some cases it also includes talking about, hey, fossil fuels and just transition and all these other things, because it's hard for some people to conceive of rights of nature when it sounds like you're threatening their livelihood. So these are also very important pieces, and it's an exciting piece of the work we do, in addition to partnering with so many of the people on this call. And I also want to shout out to Michelle Moutry from Earth Law Center, who helped draft the Rights of Rivers ordinance with us and others. So I'll close there.
Thank you, Shannon. That was very powerful and awful and disturbing and important. Can I ask, when you talk about the Ponca and the state of their current living conditions and the state of their beautiful world, and they're looking at declarations for the rights of the rivers, what do you see as the sort of potential for not only bringing those kinds of laws in, but I know how hard it is to get modern nation states to recognize any harm to anyone, let alone First Nations peoples. Do you think there's potential to get any kind of restoration or damages or anything for these groups through time, or is it looking bleak?
I mean, I think we have to hope that it is. The work that around the rights of Manoomin and taking those things to court, the Ponca are also, and it is sometimes steps forward and steps back. That's always the way it is. And we're trying things and experimenting. The Ponca, as spiritual people, are also guided in the way that they are moving forward. And they are, just before the pandemic hit, days before, we had a gathering of tribal lawyers in the area and beyond to look at constitutional change and what would that look like to put it in their constitution, which is, of course, much stronger than having just a statute, which is certainly important. And what would it mean to include their ancestral territory? What would it mean? What would they need to do to enhance the Ponca court and in order to sort of take next steps? And so all of those things are a part of it, but also in looking at tribal here in the United States, tribes do have more authority, and it's complicated for sure. But they do have different abilities to provide protections for their land, air, water, and of the 37 recognized tribes in Oklahoma alone, to be able to come together, if that is what we're able to do along the rivers, and to provide the legal and scientific and organizing assistance that it might take for them to lead that effort, could be immensely powerful. Nobody knew before, for those who don't know about Standing Rock, in the United States, it certainly was not mainstream news, but it was international news in attempting to protect and stop a pipeline. It started with a handful of people, of Indigenous people in a prayer circle, and then the world came. and shed light on it. And eventually Obama, did stop the pipeline. Of course, that was later overturned by the following president. But I think that the climate crisis, as we've talked about, means that all bets are off in terms of what's, in a positive way. And we can only look at it in a positive way. We know the destruction and the devastation is coming. But solutions that, like rights of nature, that were considered radical are now kind of like, sometimes I call it the duh principle.
I like that. But people suddenly go, what? We don't have that already? Why isn't that in place?
Yeah. How is it that we're not aligning human laws with the laws of the natural world? Duh, we have to. We can either choose to do it, or climate catastrophe will make those decisions for us. So we just keep going on those roads, and amazing things happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your work, your commitment, your passion. I can feel from you just the sheer violence of what's happened and the impact it has on you and others. I feel for you, and in solidarity, thank you for sharing those stories with us. And I think, just reflecting back on what Mari said, there's no straight line through this. We don't really know what's going to happen, but if we keep working and throwing everything at these problems, I am a believer. And I often say in my own talks that if climate change wasn't bearing down on us right this moment, I would be more optimistic than I've ever been in my life, just because of what I've seen in the last 5 years. This massive escalation of people rising up, not just protesting, but really building different futures. So I really pray and hope that that all of this, the work you're doing, which I know will come to fruition, but I hope it hurries up, because I hate the thought of people not being able to drink their own water. The only time I've ever experienced that in Australia was through our 2019 citizens' inquiry into what cotton industries and extraction was doing to this precious inland, dry land, desert river. And it was like entering a war zone. So I can only sense a little of what you guys have to face and what you're doing. And please give my love to Casey, who I know and admire her work. So thank you, Shannon. What we might do now is I might let Margaret give her talk, but if Osprey and Shannon, and I think Grant might still be on, and I think Natty might still be on, if we have time at the end, we can all just have a bit of a yarn about different ideas. But I'd love to get Margaret on right this moment, just because I'm worried about her storm. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I'm more just freaked out for you. So Shannon, thank you so much, and we'll come back and chat again in just a moment. And I'm hoping I'm having better luck with my buttons than I've had this morning. Margaret, I'll just bring you onto Spotlight. So yeah, thank you, Shannon. Very, very good to hear from you. Now, Margaret Stewart, are you okay? They're in Florida, facing down a massive looking storm. What's it called? Is it Ian or something really mundane?
Ian, yeah.
No disrespects to Ian's, but it's not a very aggressive name. It should be called Cyclone Horror Show.
So yeah, there's been quite a few jokes about that name. So yeah, unfortunately, so far we can still joke about it, because
it's not a joking matter, and I think my nervousness for you is turning
absolutely. Oh, it's our, like I said, it's our reaction as well.
It is, isn't it?
It's our coping mechanism. Yeah,
definitely the Aussie way to take the piss out of something that's terrifying.
Absolutely.
But Margaret, thank you for joining us from the Centre for Earth Jurisprudence, and we'd love to hear what you guys have been up to, and I know that you're deeply involved in Ghana as well. So thanks for your time, Margaret. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hi and greetings to everyone. Thank you so much for having me today to talk about, my experiences with rights of nature advocacy. As Michelle, our wonderful host, shared, my name is Margaret Stewart, and I'm currently a visiting professor of law at Barry University School of Law in Orlando, Florida, in the United States. I'm also the director of the in-house environmental and earth law clinic that we have. And as Michelle said, I also serve on the executive committee of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and I'm currently the facilitator for the legal hub of Garn. But I'll bring that up a few times throughout my talk. But if this is an area where you have particular interest, please do reach out, and we can see how we can connect and work together. I'll go through a few ways that we've been doing that so far. In addition, I'm also the director of the Center for Earth Jurisprudence at Verilov. That was my first job, and then all of these other jobs came from that job. But at the center, we advocate for laws, policies, and governance systems aimed to legally protect the sustainability of life and health on Earth. We believe that the best way to do this is by rethinking our legal framework in a way that takes a more Earth-centered perspective. So I wanted to share with you some of the work that we've been doing to fulfill this mission, and also how we're preparing the next generation of legal advocates to continue its development in legal systems throughout the world. So I have this quote from Thomas Berry just all over my home, my office. I give it to the students, and I just think it's a great sort of encapsulation of the work we're trying to do. He said, 2 things are needed to guide our judgment for the challenges ahead: a certain alarm at what is happening at present, and a fascination with the future available to us only if we respond creatively to the urgencies of the present. And we try to instill this ideal into our students, and the need for what Thomas Berry called a mutually enhancing relationship with the Earth community. He very poignantly said, we can't have well humans on a sick planet. We can't have a viable human economy at the expense of the Earth economy. So at the center, we try to put these theoretical concepts into practice directly by supporting cases that advocate for the rights of nature, the public trust doctrine, non-human rights, things like that. And we work closely with organizations, not only around the world, but also locally and within our state, to address additional issues, things like environmental injustices and inequity in our current approaches to environmental protection. We have a few projects in Central Florida now aimed at increasing the resiliency of vulnerable communities to natural disasters, which tonight of all nights is very on the nose. And we work with historically underrepresented communities to address what has essentially been a historic and systemic underrepresentation as it pertains to climate change adaptation and mitigation. And because that connection between the violation of the rights of nature and the violation of human rights is so intricately connected, we really can't have effective advocacy for one if we're not protecting the other. So for example, in Volusia County, which is about an hour north of where we are here in Central Florida in the state, we've been working with an area known as the Spring Hill community that has been suffering from catastrophic inland flooding during heavy rain and storm events. And environmental challenges like this lead to increased health challenges, and the residents just constantly having to deal with stormwater pollution and mold and all of the negative effects that come with those things. The Spring Hill community consists of a fairly significant area in Volusia County, and the population is just under 3,000. Of that population, the poverty rate is almost 40%. And in addition to that, the demographic makeup is about 66% Black, 7% Hispanic Latino, 8% Asian, and then the remaining 19% are the non-Hispanic white people. So our work has attempted to address the challenges that they've been experiencing through the implementation of more large-scale green infrastructure projects. And the hope is that these improvements will, better equip the Spring Hill residents to be able to adapt to these increased, effects of climate change and be more economically resilient. As Michelle pointed out, right now there is a literal hurricane just going through outside my home. But I'm fairly calm and comfortable, because I'm fortunate enough to live in a building that has a good foundation and in an area that has a relatively solid, community infrastructure. However, I am very, very worried for, the community that we've been working with for the past few years, because they have been systemically and infuriatingly, underserved and are at a significant risk for severe consequences of these large weather events. Like I said earlier, right now, my biggest concern is first my air conditioning going out. That's always going to be the number one concern in Florida, but that I'll lose power and not be able to finish my talk. That's the biggest concern in my life right now. That's not what the people in Spring Hill and what many other communities throughout Florida are experiencing right now. And this vulnerability to increased ecological disasters, it's not due to bad luck. It's been purposely facilitated through environmental racism and economic discrimination. So our work to increase awareness, support, and eventual acceptance of the rights of nature, in that work, it's important that we're not leaving those with less social capital out of the movement, right? And if anything, it's more important to have them leading the movement and actually be in a position to be able to actively do so. So that's one of the ways where we kind of combine those, human rights and nature's rights advocacies together in a more local, direct type of advocacy. But we've also been advocating for the recognition of water rights in the state. It's come up a few times in Grant's talk and in Mari's talk, that in 2020, Orange County, Florida, which is where I'm located, became the biggest jurisdiction in the United States to pass rights of nature laws. And it stated that Orange County citizens were empowered to enforce the rights of waterways to exist and to be protected against pollution. In 2021, relying on that ballot initiative, Orange County citizens had initiated a case to prevent the destruction of wetlands in this protected area by development activity. So at issue in this particular case was a permit that had been granted by the state to developers to, dredge and fill waterways for the purpose of constructing buildings. And the plaintiffs, which due to this newly adopted measure included the waterways as one of the plaintiffs, claimed that the activity violated those rights, and it asked the court to issue an injunction to stop that development. However, unfortunately, the state and the developer were able to argue that state legislation, this also came up earlier, the idea of preemption, that's ironically here called the Clean Waterways Act of 2020, actually preempted the county charter amendments, which nullified the waterways rights. The bill prohibits local governments from providing legal rights to any plant, animal, body of water, or other part of the natural environment unless specifically authorized by the state constitution. So it was a very comprehensive attempt to squash the rights of nature movement in Florida. And then they also argued, that essentially it was an administrative thing that they needed to exhaust their administrative remedy. So unfortunately, this case was dismissed in July. And despite, very clear public opinion in support of the rights of nature in this area, we're still running into some very common barriers to the recognition of these rights in the United States. So, that work continues as well. We have been able to work with local governments to propose and implement other Earth jurisprudence concepts, such as the precautionary principle. And we've had the opportunity to work with our partners internationally to support efforts to recognize, the rights of non-human members in the Earth community, specifically with the legal hub of the Global Alliance. We're working with groups like Greenpeace to provide additional support for their case to protect jaguar species in the Gran Chaco Argentino ecoregion, so that the species can continue to exist, to enjoy its ecosystem, to maintain its life plans, its health, well-being, food, freedom, reproduction, and security, because there are less than 20 individuals in this species left in the region. So we're providing an amicus curiae brief, or a friend of the court brief, providing additional arguments that the jaguars and their habitat have legal standing, and that the Gran Chaco Argentino ecoregion is a living entity subject to rights. And we are also explaining to the court that Argentina's own constitution, statutory law, and judicial precedent all support not only the acknowledgement of the species having standing, but also the implementation of concepts like the precautionary principle in their decision making. So this case is being called by the end of the year, and hopefully by next time we have one of these updates, we'll be having some exciting news about the furtherance of the rights of nature developments in Argentina. And so I'm over my time, but I also just wanted to say how, one of my favorite areas of this work is being able to engage with the law students in these processes, both at our Earth Law and Policy Fellowship at the center and our Environmental and Earth Law Clinic at the school, and that it's been very exciting to see the students, not only take to this subject positively, but already thinking of ways to implementing it. We have a few cases right now that are dealing with, protecting panther species, surveying conservation lands, PFAS contamination, drilling permits, all these different areas. And in all of them, students have been suggesting solutions that really incorporate Earth jurisprudence principles, specifically recognizing the rights of nature. So I was on one of these webinars last week, and Michelle and I talked about how, when we first started teaching, that these concepts are really met with skepticism. But just this past week, after that last webinar for this, one of my students ended up getting very frustrated during their case rounds, just stating, why can't people just see that these beings have a right to not be harmed like this? And why do we have to go through all of this every time we want to stop this harm?
Yeah.
And inside, I was absolutely heartbroken because they're absolutely right. But then I was also kind of elated because my evil plan to, make everybody advocate for the rights of nature is working. So yeah, in addition to that and the coursework and the things that we do, honestly, that's one of my favorite areas, because really, that's what we're promoting. We're trying to get that next generation ready to continue, this advocacy. So I'm sorry, I went very much over, but that's just a little bit of what we're doing.
No, that was wonderful. And you're very welcome to go over, given you've stuck it out through a cyclone to be with us. Thank you so much. Before I ask a question, I know that Shannon has a question or comment, so I might just pop her in the spotlight so she can chat with you.
Just quickly, so Margaret, it's so good to see you. And so good to be able to see you in the midst of all this. I just want to, will you be going to Argentina? Did I hear you say for the I know that Casey and I will be going with the GARN Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature delegation. Will you be part of that?
No, so currently we're preparing the brief, and the way it works is that if your brief gets called, by the court, then someone has to go to defend it. So we're not at that stage yet. And once we get to that stage, we haven't determined who would go. But yeah, that's where we are there.
All right.
Thanks, Shannon. I'm just aware of time because this has gone really fast for me. I've enjoyed every moment of it, but we have been together for 2.5 hours. How awesome are we? So Margaret, one question I have for you before we start to wrap up the session is in terms of teaching the students, what kind of core elements are you teaching? And I have to say that I taught at the Centre for Earth Jurisprudence after I finished my PhD, and it was really fun teaching a whole semester on Earth jurisprudence. So I'm just curious, what are you actually teaching kids now, young people now, in terms of the course content? And yeah, have you found that there's certain things you don't teach anymore? How is it changing over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have actually a variety of courses now that we've developed just in the past few years, dedicated to earth law, environmental justice, climate justice, and environmental ethics. And all of that's in addition to our regulatory environmental law courses. And it's been really great since the publication of the Earth Law textbook that Grant introduced earlier, because it's been a lot easier to sort of sell these courses, because we have a good curriculum to base it on. So yeah, and actually just tonight, if our school wasn't closed for weather, I would have had to have jumped off this webinar as soon as I was done to teach my Earth Law course. We have one this semester. The goal is to have that generation of legal advocates be exposed to these ideas, so that they can incorporate them into their work, whatever area of the law they end up going into. Now we do have our environmental and earth law certificates, so those students do all the courses and write their final theses on one of an earth law topic, something like that. But we even have just a 1-credit course that's only for a few weeks that just introduces the students into all of these topics, just sort of a little tasting of the full courses that we do have. So we actually have quite a variety depending on what areas the students are interested in. What I'm finding is that environmental justice has become a huge concern to the students, and those courses, the justice-centered courses, have been very well attended and have gotten good reviews so far. So, but yeah, it's like we said, the publication of all these works has really made getting these courses on the roster a lot easier.
That's excellent. Thank you, Margaret. Well, look, I'm aware of the time, and although I would have loved to have a bit of a discussion amongst all of us, I think it might be better, given the time of night for many of you, we might wrap it up now. But as I mentioned before, Ayla, and I'm sure other groups, will continue to bring people together around these discussions. It is so excellent to hear from all of you with your amazing work around this planet. It gives me incredible hope. Fills my heart with a little happiness and a little sadness, given the troubles we face, but the really quite remarkable human beings who are really working with every fiber of their being to do good deeds. So what I might do is I might just spotlight our speakers who are still on. A number of folks had to leave. Or if you turn your video on, I can spotlight you so that we can wrap up and say good night. I'll do the Truman Show. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, because I think everyone's on different time zones. So thanks, everyone. Just give me 1 sec. I just want to respect everyone. There we go. Shannon, if you don't want to turn your video on, that's okay. I think Natty's still with us too. Grant, I think, is on his phone. There we go. And spotlight. So there you are, Shannon. Lovely. So Mari Margul, who had to jump off for another meeting. Natalia Green, Grant Wilson, Osprey, Oriel Lake, Shannon Biggs, Margaret Stewart, thank you so much for joining us. Grant said, I can't talk, but I am listening. A huge apology from Erin O'Donnell, who was going to talk about the recognition, not so much of legal rights, but of beingness of the Yarra River here in Australia. But there will be other opportunities, and certainly I'll be inviting everyone to get back together, perhaps in 6 months' time, for some more regular updates from around the world. So thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your remarkable work. I know Natty had to wrestle putting kids to bed. Margaret's wrestling a cyclone. Osprey has got to rush off shortly. And Shannon is always very busy. And I'm sure Grant is too. So thank you for your time. And thank you to everyone in the audience. I've put web links for all of the organizations that folks have mentioned. But do look at the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature website. You will be able to see all these awesome humans and links to their work, the tribunals, their organizations. We wish you all the very best with everything you're doing. And please stay in touch. We down under folks like Ayla burrow in and focus on our continent, but we're always engaging in our international networks and just one little Zoom call away. So thank you for everything. I'll stop talking if you guys want to just say a word to say goodbye. So Osprey, I'll go with you first if you want to say good night.
Thank you for all the great presentations, and thank you, Michelle, for organizing us. And let's have our movement for rights of nature grow and be part of our new world.
Thank you, Osprey. Margaret, did you want to say good night?
Yeah, I just echo everything Osprey said, and thanks, Michelle, for organizing this whole month. These events have been amazing. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Margaret, and please stay safe. I'm very worried about you and many friends that I grew to have in Florida. So take care. And Natty, did you want to say good night from Ecuador?
Sure, Michelle. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for bringing us all together. This is an amazing growing movement. So I'm really, really happy to share the floor with these amazing people. And as I said in my presentation, I feel that we're doing this acupuncture to the world. So let's keep healing it. So thank you so much.
I love that analogy. And Ms. Biggs, Shannon, how are you? Yeah.
I want to just really, this has been kind of astonishing. In that a lot of us work together, but we never really get to dive deep into what each other are doing. And so this has been just such a gift. And I'm so grateful for you for pulling this together so wonderfully. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Shannon. It's the least I can do given the work you're doing, but it is a good reminder. We're also busy doing the stuff that we often don't have the time to yarn with each other. So I will take it upon myself to be the annoying voice going, do you want to get together for a webinar? We'll do that more often. I'll try not to use a falsetto voice while I do it, however. So on that very cheerful note, go forth, everyone, do good deeds. Thank you so much, everybody. And we will see you very soon. Take care of yourselves. Thanks, everyone.